right, we have some breaking news coming into our newsroom right now in connection to the Idaho college killing case. According to new court filings just dropped, prosecutors allege that two of the surviving roommates were trying to reach the victims. This is according to these text messages. Prosecutors leading the case against the accused killer, Bryan Kohberger, have asked the court to admit these exchanges, saying that they, quote, present a sense of impressions and excited utterances describing the real-time reactions as to what was happening. Those surviving roommates are expected to testify at the upcoming murder trial in August. Now, Bryan Kohberger's defense team, who says he is innocent, trying to keep these out. So as we bring this to our ABC News legal contributor, Channa Lloyd, for more on this. So, Channa, as we're going through these filings here, first of all, it sounds like prosecutors are pushing back here on the idea that putting these text messages out there, we'll start there. They say they're not hearsay, as the defense team would allege. They also note, Channa, that the previous judge in this case in Moscow decided to allow some of these. And what the prosecution is really saying here, Channa, is that this creates a timeline. So when you hear that and you think about this timeline and these text messages that go from about 4:22 in the morning describing someone wearing a ski mask, trying to get a hold of each other, how scared they are. And then the next really big question here, Channa, is this 911 call that comes several hours later. But another thing I want to point out here is a 10:23 a.m. text message exchange. So there's just a lot of dotted timeline here. What does that do to a jury? What does that do to the case here? And do you think the judge will allow it?
So there's a lot to unpack here. So when we talk about what this would do to a jury, juries always want to be present. They want as much information about what happened at the event and the time in which it happened. So this is going to be something, if admitted, the jury's going to look very carefully at. Now, what is the standard for admitting it? We have to remember that hearsay is basically a statement that's given out of court that is brought into court to prove that it's true. It's normally not allowed. However, there are a number of exceptions. As the prosecution is alleging, this falls under excited utterance. What is that? That's basically a statement that you say as something is happening. It's typically a statement that's uttered when there's a shocking or surprising event. And the idea behind this exception is that you have not had time to formulate a story. Therefore, we can rely on the truthfulness of the statement. So when we look at these text messages, we see how close in proximity to time that what was happening in the house. We know that it was very close in time. They were clearly afraid in the text messages. So that's going to qualify for the type of event that spawns excited utterance. So when I'm looking at it, what I see is that this is likely to be admitted, maybe not all of it, but I do think a good portion of it will be admitted as the exception of an excited utterance to hearsay.
And so in terms, again, here, also of the timeline and the hearsay argument in the 911 call as well, they note here that, you know, it's sad to read because at 4:30 in the morning, they're texting their friends, please answer, why aren't you answering? Then again, at 10:23 a.m., please answer, are you up? A reminder to our viewers here that the 911 call was not placed until 11:58, so even more hours passed there. And what prosecutors are saying here is that the previous judge ruled the 911 call also is not hearsay and that it also helps them understand why the call came in for an unconscious individual, because if you remember this case, that had a lot of question marks around it.
Absolutely. I mean, when we're looking at this 911 call, we have to remember, and it does provide a lot of context, because if we look at the text messages as they are and plain reading, it appears to be individuals who are nervous and scared that there is something happening in their home. So when we talk about 911 calls, the things that people say when they discover someone that seems to be unresponsive, those are typically going to fall under the excited utterance exception, because it's happening real time, and it's something that is going to normally shock the most individuals into making statements that are going to be truthful because they haven't had time to think about it. So I'm not surprised that these would be admitted. It's obviously up to the judge, but it's very clear that these would fall under that exception.
The 911 dispatcher in this readout of this call continues to ask the people on the phone to stop passing the phone around. The dispatcher says, "I feel like I've talked to about 4 people here," noting, Channa, that both of these surviving roommates are expected to testify at this trial, and that the defense has really been trying to put some question marks, in particular about the one surviving roommate who says she saw a man clad in black that night. How does a 911 call like this change that?
I mean, the 911 call provides a lot of context to the jury and to the case. It also speaks to who was there, what they were seeing, what was actually happening at that time. So, in the 911 caller wanting to make sure that the phone's not being passed around is what she's trying to do, is make sure she has a communication line and that she can identify who she's speaking to, because that's very important to know who was there at that time. So all of that information is going to be very critical to this trial.
It certainly is. This is a huge load of information, perhaps the most dramatic that we've seen so far in this case. Channa Lloyd, thank you so much for coming on to help us make sense of it.
Great to join you, Kane.
Of course, and be sure to catch my ABC audio true crime podcast about this case. It's called The King Road Killings, and you can download it wherever you get your podcasts.